Hello, and welcome to China Forum, the leading program for discussing the latest in trends and development in modern Chinese culture, politics, economics, and social issues. My name is Shannon Tiezi, and I will be your moderator for our program today. We are happy to welcome Peter Brookes to the show. Mr. Brookes is Senior Fellow for National Security Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. He also serves as a member of the U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission. Mr. Brookes previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Affairs under President George W. Bush. Mr. Brookes is also a decorated Navy veteran and a retired Navy commander. He has published over 300 articles in newspapers, journals, and magazines, in addition to his columns, which appear in the New York Post and the Boston Herald. Mr. Brookes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Today we will be discussing military relations between the U.S. and China, including both military tensions and attempts to increase cooperation. To provide some background, since the U.S. resumed military-to-military contacts with China in 1993, there have been noticeable ups and downs in the military relationship as the overall relationship warms or cools. During President Hu Jintao's visit to the United States in January 2011, President Obama and President Hu issued a joint statement in which they agreed to further develop military relations between the United States and China to promote mutual understanding and a stable and positive bilateral relationship. So to start off, Mr. Brookes, how would you characterize the current state of the military-to-military relationship between China and the United States?
That's a complicated question, and it's probably best to break it down. I mean, it depends. It's kind of like a Rorschach ink test. You know, people see what they want to see. As you're right, there have been ups and downs in the relationship. There are fits and starts in terms of getting together to talk about things. I think that there are opportunities, and there are also yellow lights or cautions that to be taken into account. My relationship with U.S. China military relations goes back to many years, to my days on Capitol Hill, as well as at the Pentagon. And there's also U.S. law that guides it. In the year 2000, there's the National Defense Authorization Act, which guides those sort of things. Right now, we're seeing we're going to have political transitions in both countries. Obviously, there's elections this fall in the United States. The Chinese are going through a once-in-a-decades transition. Interestingly, we haven't seen the heir apparent, Xi Jinping. Some people are going around with the joke saying, now you Xi him, now you don't. And we don't really know where he is. So he's going to be the new leader. Will probably become the leader. We'll have a new commander-in-chief or a re-elected commander-in-chief in the United States. And Xi Jinping, supposedly, assuming that his health isn't of such a nature that he cannot go on to ascend to the top of the Chinese Communist Party, will be the chairman of the Chinese Military Commission. So that's an important thing. So I think there's not going to be a lot going on, I think, between now and early next year in terms of that. The Chinese have had their complaints in the past, Taiwan arms sales. There's a lot of disruption right now, especially political, over the South China Sea. I just testified on Capitol Hill yesterday about China and the South China Sea, so Congress is paying attention to this. So there's a lot of things out there. It's hard to come up with a bumper sticker in terms of U.S.-China relations on the mill-to-mill front right now.
Sure. A lot of times when we think about the military relationship, what people are actually talking about is these sort of high-level exchanges. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta is planning to visit China at some point in the fall. Obama also pushed for the creation of the Strategic Security Dialogue, which is kind of an annual high-level meeting between defense leaders on both sides. So what sort of effect do these high-level meetings actually have on improving military relations as a whole? Are we seeing a lot of positive effect from that?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, some people define military and military relations as, soldiers and sailors, admirals and generals getting together. Of course, on the Chinese side, they don't have that civilian leadership, right? The head of their Defense Department, their Minister of Defense, is a general. General Liang. So I mean, there is some sort of, it's kind of a hybrid. On our side, Leon Panetta represents the Defense Department. And then of course there's all these different levels. There's the Defense Consultative Talks, which take place at the Undersecretary level. And then there might be even other ones below that, and then there might be ship visits. Or an admiral. I think Admiral Locklear, Pacific Commander, went to China last year. So it's hard to say. The problem with a lot of these talks is that there's not much substance to them. One of the real complaints about U.S. China military to military relations, or Pentagon, or that sort of level relationship, is transparency, substance to the talks, reciprocity. We may host the Chinese general or the Minister of Defense at the Pentagon, but we don't regularly go to the Chinese Pentagon. The Chinese, there's certain topics they just don't want to talk about. For instance, nuclear issues. Chinese, what they call the Chinese Second Artillery. Their strategic nuclear weapons and their programs. The Chinese really don't want to talk about that. So there's all these sort of difficulties. They've opened up a little bit, but for many years, going back to the 1990s, and the reason for this law is that the United States was very open and transparent about things, and there was concerns that the Chinese might be more on an intelligence collection mission than on a really sort of an exchange with the United States to discuss things. The idea behind this is that it's worthwhile developing personal relationships, especially when there's a crisis. In other words, when the American EP-3 went down in Hainan Island, it's always, the idea is that hopefully you could have a Secretary of Defense called a Minister of Defense, and he knows him.
Right. They've
broken bread together, they've talked, maybe they've had some social times, and they could talk through things, through a hotline. But sometimes you have to have somebody willing to, you have to be able to develop those relationships. The United States and China look at each other warily on security issues. Obviously there's concerns about the rise of China. I mean, Secretary Hillary Clinton, I think, hit the nail on the head recently. And I'm only paraphrasing here, but she said, and this is what a lot of people have talked about when they talk about power transition and things like that. This is a situation where you have a status quo power, the United States, and this rising power. And what will the future look like? They look at each other warily on security issues. There are Chinese scholars and academics who say the United States is the next enemy. There are even some people within the Chinese government and the military who say that. There are certainly people in the United States who say those same sort of things. Others hope that we can coexist peacefully and in a mutual beneficial way. So it's a tough one, and I think it's one of the really big questions. Obviously, there are other national security issues out there, such as Iran, what's going on in the Middle East today, the terrible tragedy that took place in Libya yesterday of this taping. But China, the rise of China, especially its military capability, is something that's making people very, very nervous because they don't know what Chinese intentions are. So the hope is that you can sit down and get a sense of intentions, but people have to be willing to share that. And of course, with political transitions going on, this could be Secretary Panetta's last visit to China as a Secretary of Defense. General Liang might be replaced. I mean, there's all sorts of things. So I think we're in this kind of, there might be some visits, there might be some opportunities to talk, but I think it's really going to see what the new governments and regimes look like in 2013.
Sure. And with China especially undergoing a leadership transition where they're replacing, almost all of their Politburo Standing Committee, and there are also rumors that they're going to replace a lot of their high military brass. And obviously on the American side, we're not sure to what extent we're going to have a turnover, but sure, this will have an effect on the relationship building. So does this mean military-military relations are going to be kind of starting from scratch again, or is there more potential to move forward?
Well, I think because the Chinese change leadership basically once every 10 years. We change it potentially every 4 years. And in some cases, depending with elections in Congress, they're not. They have a role here. It's different than the National People's Assembly. They also have a role in policy making and in relationships. So we have a lot of change over here, and for them, that's probably a bit disconcerting. I guarantee you that the Chinese are watching the American elections as much as any American is, because they want to know who is going to be in that place. And there might be some changes between the two candidates in terms of China policy. So I think we talk about 7 out of 10 on the military commission are going to change over. So there's going to be huge changes potentially. At least on one side we know there's going to be big changes. On the American side we're not clear because we won't know that till November. So I think everybody's going to be probably waiting, and 2013 is going to be a very important year. I think also Americans are trying to size up the Vice President Xi. Some people know him, some of them met him. What are his views on security issues? I mean, we probably know how he feels on Taiwan. That's probably not an issue. We have a pretty good guess. But what about the other things? What about the South China Sea? What about the East China Sea? So that those are big issues that people will want to know about on the security side. So there's going to be a lot of flux in the next I'd say 6 to 8 months.
Let's start talking about some of these issues. First of all, on the Chinese side, when General Liang Guanglie visited the U.S. recently, he listed 3 factors that he said were limiting U.S. China military relations. The first, arms sales to Taiwan. And the second was U.S. surveillance in airspace and waters near the Chinese border. And then the third is some of the laws, which you've touched on briefly on the U.S. side, that prevents certain types of military exchanges and interactions. Do you see any of these changing on the U.S. side for any reason? And if not, do you think these are going to be kind of a hard barrier to U.S.-China military relations?
No, I don't see any change on the U.S. side. And I'm not surprised that the general cited those, because changes in those would advantage the Chinese side. The Chinese, in terms of Taiwan, the Chinese have still not renounced the use of force against Taiwan. The United States has the Taiwan Relations Act, but the Chinese are very well aware of. I think that I firmly believe, and I think many Americans believe, that Taiwan's future should be determined in a peaceful and mutually agreeable manner. Now, I was just in Taiwan last week, so I was there they talked about a lot of things, but the things they talked probably the least about, South China Sea and East China Sea were big issues, but the things they talked the least about were probably the Taiwan Strait, because things are relatively stable. There have been a lot of progress. Tensions have been reduced, except on security issues. There's no dialogue going beyond between Taiwan and the mainland on security issues. And I think the Taiwan view, if I might, is that we're happy with the way things are right now, but we're not ready to talk about security issues. So I think that Taiwan has legitimate defense needs. China has been involved in a significant military buildup, an unprecedented military buildup. Their defense budget has averaged more than 10% for over 20 years. Some people say that the Chinese defense budget is number 2 in the world today. May be as much as $200 billion. And a lot of that stuff in China is not included in their budget. They're pretty open about saying how much their budget's going to increase, but that's also alarming in a way, because they say, oh, we're increasing it 11% this year. That's significant. But the budget only tells you numbers. It doesn't talk about capabilities. China is developing a very capable military force. And people ask, why? Is China threatened by anybody? And so they're worried about the intentions of China's military buildup. And Taiwan is part of that. Taiwan is a democratic state. I remember going back to the days when China used to say that democracy and Confucianism are not compatible. Chinese culture and democracy are not compatible. Well, Taiwan kind of killed that argument in 1996 when they held the first free elections there, and now they're a fully functional democracy today. But I think any country has a right to defend itself. And Taiwan is threatened. There are 1,500 to 1,600 ballistic missiles across the Taiwan Strait and Fujian, the military region, aimed at Taiwan. China is developing a significant military, a naval capability that could certainly blockade or surround Taiwan, and project power into the South China Sea. So I don't think Taiwan arms sales are going to change. And I understand the Chinese position, because the Chinese basically want to absorb Taiwan peacefully. They don't want to fight over it. I understand that. But I think there are others who feel that this question needs to be answered in a democratic and mutually beneficial way. The second one was
American surveillance.
right. Now there's a fundamental difference between views of what can take place in the exclusive economic zone under the 1982 Law of the Sea Treaty. Chinese feel that military ships can't pass through there without or loiter or sail there without permission from China. This cuts against the grain of what the international community believes about what the Law of the Sea Treaty provides for in the exclusive economic zones, which it basically says that you have your territorial waters, which are out to about 12 waters, and you have total say over what happens there. The 200-mile exclusive economic zone is, you have economic rights. That's what's called an exclusive economic zone. You know, you can say who can fish there, who can mine there, you know, the seabed, you know, drill for oil, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But innocent passage of military ships is not prohibited, and the Chinese don't like it. I probably understand why they don't like it, but it does go against what the Law of the Sea Treaty. Of course, the United States is not a signatory to the Law of the Sea Treaty, although we generally abide by it in terms of navigational and practical maritime use of the sea. So they just don't like it. I understand that. So they want us to stop. I think the United States and others are interested in what China might be doing in terms of military, in terms of their military, because it's making people very nervous in that part of the world. Some people would say it's destabilizing because it's a change. A lot of changes are destabilizing. It's a significant change in what's going on there. So that's another thing. And then the third thing is
the U.S. laws that prevent certain military exchanges.
Well, of course, because the Chinese want us, for instance, to sell advanced technology to China. But then there's the law because of the Tiananmen Square sanctions. We can't sell arms to China. There's also the National Defense Authorization Act that I referenced earlier, which goes back to in 2000 and talks about concerns about reciprocity and transparency in military and military relations. And we don't feel that some people don't feel that that's the case. Now, I'm outside the Pentagon. I don't know exactly what sort of activities they're planning, they're undertaking. But it seems to me that those sort of things would advantage the Chinese side without providing similar benefits to the United States. I'm sure if you had somebody here from the Pentagon today, they could probably list a couple of things beyond transparency and reciprocity that they would like to see. For instance, the Chinese to engage on certain sort of issues. So I understand the Chinese position. Not sure everybody believes that there are benefits to military relationship. My view is that there can be. Certainly with friends and allies, we find that's the case. It is good to know somebody and be able to call them and get them to do something. The problem is that there are cases where commanders have known each other between not relating to China, but other instances that I won't get into, that those phone calls didn't make any difference.
Right.
They called, and because countries do what's in their own best interest.
Okay, well that was a great analysis of those three issues, but I think most of our viewers who follow U.S. China relations might be thinking, well, there's one issue that's in the news a lot that was left off of that list, and that is these territorial disputes that are going on in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea. Recently, we've seen it between China and Japan. There's also been flare-ups between China and the Philippines, and those are both key U.S. allies. And while the U.S. is officially neutral in these disputes, it also has a commitment to support its allies if China were to use military force. And this is causing a lot of tension in the U.S.-China military relationship right now. So is this kind of pulling the whole relationship backwards, or is there a way to work through this?
Well, hopefully this would be an issue to talk about if they were to sit down and have these meetings, whether between the military commanders, people in uniform, or civilians. Well, obviously that's not quite true on the Chinese side because the Ministry of Defense is run by the military. But if you were to have Pentagon civilians. No, I think this is a huge issue. One of the most interesting things that I've recently discovered is that the Chinese claim, the mainland's claim, is basically a Republic of China claim. in the South China Sea, this 9-dash line, which was originally an 11-dash line. Some people call it cow's tongue. I don't know. I was told that. I guess it has an interesting way of expressing it in Chinese. I'm not a Chinese speaker, so I don't know. But they've also called it the cow's tongue because it kind of flops down into that. I just heard that at the hearing yesterday, as a matter of fact. So I think that there's, this is an interesting legal question. I'm not a lawyer. China is basically the origins of this 9-dash line and claims to the South China Sea originates with Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China. There was a map done in the 1930s. It was reaffirmed in the 1940s by the Republic of China. And the mainland makes claim to this claim that was the Republic of China. So does Taiwan. So their claims are basically the same. And there's ambiguity there. Are you only talking about the islands that are in that part, the Paracels, the Spratlys? Or are you talking about the maritime? Are you considering this to be a Chinese lake? Mm-hmm. So this is a very, very big issue, a very, very tense issue right now. And I would say this is what's making people most nervous. And like I said, when I was in Taiwan, this is what people were talking about, not so much the cross-strait relationship.
Sure. I think one complicating factor to this is the U.S. rebalancing to Asia that President Obama and his team have been rolling out. And part of that is more concerted diplomatic efforts and even military efforts to engage with other countries in the region, many of whom have these territorial disputes with China. So when the U.S. reaches out to Vietnam to improve relations, to the Philippines to improve relations, even to Burma, Myanmar, China views that as a threat and as U.S. meddling in this South China Sea issue. So how do you think the U.S.'s ties to these other countries, including its allies, are affecting the military relationship with China, which they also would like to improve as part of this rebalancing?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has, like I said, everybody will look at this a bit differently. And of course, China, the American relationship with Philippines goes well back before the PRC existed, before the Republic of China existed. And Vietnam obviously had a very difficult relationship with them for many years, and that relationship is improving. I think I understand Chinese concerns, but the United States is a Pacific nation. South China Sea is of critical strategic importance in the United States. It's the world's most transited waterway. Goes through the Malacca Straits. I mean, billions of dollars of seaborne trade pass through that. A lot of it to America. A lot of energy transits it as well, going north to American allies such as Japan and South Korea. I think there's concerns that China might try to exert hegemony over the South China Sea, thereby blocking the transit of seaborne cargo, energy, and making it, basically infringing upon freedom of the seas. So I think there's a lot of concern there. Now, in terms of a flare-up, a military flare-up, all my understanding is that all treaties require that the different parties to it undertake, go through their own constitutional processes. There's no automatic trigger, even in NATO, Article 5. If one country is attacked, all countries don't have to participate in a response to that. They go through their own constitutional processes. And the same thing is true here. And I think the reason nations do this is they don't want to be dragged into something they didn't start or have anything into it. I think the United States is being an honest and a fair broker there. China wants to negotiate bilaterally. Of course, they're such a huge country. You can imagine a small country like Brunei or somebody else. I mean, Singapore, they must feel quite overwhelmed. And they've resisted a code of conduct in that part of the world. Some people believe that China is hoping that they will push and others will recede, and they'll just continue to push and push and push and take what they can. So I think there's the Obama administration is rightfully very, very concerned, and I think if I can channel them for a moment, which they probably wouldn't appreciate, but I think they came in with a very open mind about China. I think they really tried to reach out to China. I think they've been sorely disappointed. The issue of, I don't quite agree with their assessment here regarding Syria. They tend to, I think there should be more American leadership on it, but they tend to blame it on Russia and China because they can't get support at the United Nations. They don't feel like they've gotten the support on Iran that they'd like. North Korea, that's another issue. I think they had hoped that, that some of these issues could go through Beijing, and I think they've been sorely disappointed. And now the South China Sea. So I'm not surprised by their reactions, and I think that they're showing a pretty good level of concern about U.S. China relations and China's role in that part of the world.
Okay. As I think you mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that the United States and China's neighbors are concerned is that China has been building up its military.
Right.
And of course, China claims that this is natural. As a growing power, it wants to build up its military. And conversely, the United States is developing military plans, contingency plans, including air-sea battle, which has come under fire in China. They maintain it's basically an attack plan against China. The Pentagon, of course, says it's not targeted at that. But it seems like in both countries, their domestic military improvements are really at the heart of mutual suspicion because they don't trust each other's intentions. So do you think that there is room for a level of military improvement and advancement that can just be seen as natural and not as a threat? Or will they inherently distrust any new weapon that China develops or that America develops?
That's hard to say. I mean, China and the United States have been strategic rivals for quite some time. There was some warming in the 1980s when there was when the Soviet Union was a mutual threat. Nixon's opening to China in the 70s. There were a lot of things, but the relationship has never really been warm. There's been a strong rivalry between the PRC and the United States. I mean, if you talk to academics, they probably tell you that it's considered to be a rivalry. Maybe the rivalry is becoming increasingly intense. You have to remember that deterrence and threats are all in the eyes of the individual who are viewing them. Obviously, China has certain views of American actions in that part of the world, and I think the Americans have views of Chinese actions. I think what really, at first blush, gets to people is this large Chinese military buildup, and it just makes people, I think, harken back to the 1930s.
Sure.
You can deny history, but you can't really escape it. You can try to deny history, I should say, but you can't really escape it. The buildup in Europe, the buildup in Asia, by different country, obviously, by different countries. Because what it comes down to, Shannon, in my view, is that the threat comes from a couple of things. Very simply, a very simple arithmetic way that I look at it is threat is intentions and capabilities. Capabilities takes years to develop. Intentions can change overnight.
Sure.
And so this is I think is the concern. Once China has this big, large, capable military, they could easily decide to engage and use it.
And that's why everyone's trying to feel out each other's intentions.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful, insightful discussion of U.S.-China military relations.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us today on China Forum. We'll see you next time.